Right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today, we have Steve Morielli, Dr. Steve Morielli from the Department of Natural Resources, a friend and colleague of mine, joining us to talk to you about amphibians and reptiles. Steve is a conservation biologist. He knows a lot of things about a lot of things, but his specialty is amphibians and reptiles, and very specifically turtles. So enjoy the presentation, and thanks for being with us today, Steve.
Thanks, Christy. Hi, it's great to be together with you guys, even if it is just remotely. And I want to share what we know about amphibians and reptiles and go through kind of what they are and where they came from. And then the distinction between them, because it's a little bit blurry often, and some people can get a little confused. In fact, we all get a little confused about it. And then I want to show you some individuals, some of the key players, some of our very common amphibians and some reptiles from around the area. And Christy and I can kind of work you through some of the identification features. Some animals have field marks, and a field mark is one of those things that if you look and you find that, then that's what that animal is. It's really great. Some don't, some are a little bit harder than others. Okay, so first I'll introduce myself. I'm a conservation ecologist, as Christy said, in the Department of Natural Resources. I work with Christy. We work on a lot of things together. We do forest research, and we overlap a lot in doing conservation research on vertebrates. As she said, have specialized in amphibians and reptiles for a long time. If you hold my feet to the fire and you say, which animals do you know the best of those? It's ultimately going to get, the circle will get smaller and smaller and smaller. It'll be reptiles. And then inside reptiles, it'll be turtles. And inside turtles, it'll also be sea turtles. So those are my taxonomic specialties. But because we do conservation, then we study all sorts of dimensions of ecology and the environment, and especially those related, in this case, related to amphibians and reptiles. Christy and I also co-teach a course, conservation ecology, each year, and it's a field course. I got to say, Christy, what do you think? The #1 course on campus or the #1 course on campus?
I'm fairly certain it's the #1 course.
It is the best. It is clearly the best, no question. And then we work a lot together on research, and Christy does a lot of extension, and also drags me into her delusional realm for extension, which I really like doing, by the way. Okay, so let's talk about amphibians and reptiles a little bit. And first, before we get started though, I want to just go, these are my go-to books, and these are ones I recommend for you guys. And for two different reasons. The one on the left, the Peterson Guide, is a typical Peterson Guide, and it has Eastern, Central, and North America reptiles and amphibians. It's comprehensive. It has everybody that occurs in that huge swath of the country. And because of that, there are little kind of, I don't know, maybe a paragraph or two or sometimes more about the organism you're looking at. The good news is it's comprehensive in that it's got all the animals. So if you have one in your hand, it's going to be in that book. The bad news is it's not really comprehensive when it comes to talking about the animals. The other thing I want to caution about field guides is that the picture in a field guide or the drawing is really a representative of one or two or a subset of all the organisms. So it's very hard sometimes to make the thing you're looking at in the book look like the thing you're holding in your hand or looking at on the ground. So I like to have a variety of sources, because then you'll see color differences and size differences and all sorts of other things that would show up in different publications, really. So the Peterson Guide is great. It's comprehensive, and it's got your animals bound to be in there. I like the amphibians and reptiles of the Great Lakes region for, I guess, because of its in-depth information on the subset of organisms that amphibians and reptiles live in the region. The bad news is that it is the Great Lakes region, so people who are downstate and a little bit farther away will have a lot of these animals, and I'd still recommend the book. I mean, they'll have most of them, but there are some, since you start moving out and getting into the limits of other animals, this will be a subset, only a subset of the animals that you have in your region. I like it a lot because there's a page or two or even three sometimes talking about the life history, the ecology, the timing, the places where they occur, some notable facts about them. It's really good, and Jim Harding really does a great job in this. So those are my two. I think there's another one that's good, but Christy, you've taken that New York amphibian and reptile one. Have you taken that out for a ride?
Yes, it's a larger book, more than just a field guide, but it has,
Yeah, like a text. You'd have to carry it around as a textbook, right?
yeah, but I really do like it. And it has a lot more detailed information about the organisms. And I think it talks a little bit more about where specifically in New York State each animal is found. And I think it's a really great supplement if you're interested in delving more into the life history of the animals.
So I've thumbed through that one, and that looks good. And Christy and I are both, between the two of us, know a lot of these people and have a lot of respect for the guys who put that together. So that should be a good source. And that's what? Amphibians and Reptiles of New York State?
I think something to that
Yeah,
effect.
okay. Anyway, so that's a good one. So highly recommend these guys. They're great field books and information. Amphibians and Reptiles. I don't want to bore you with history. This is not a history lesson, but it's really important to start off like this. Like, where did amphibians and reptiles come from, and why are we lumping them together? In fact, we call the study of amphibians and reptiles herpetology, as if it's one group. Amphibians and reptiles are one group, and they share these characteristics, and they're very similar. When in fact, I want you to focus in on this one. I have look at all the origins of vertebrates here. And if you look over 1, 2, 3, fourth from the right is amphibia. Let's see, do I have a mouse? Can you see that mouse, Christy?
I can, yeah.
Okay, so there's amphibia right there. And look where amphibia came out. So the first amphibians showed up about 370 million years ago. This is the first, they've come out of some really odd looking fish type creatures, and they went into amphibians. I point out that they're coming out of fish because that becomes really important in our story in a couple minutes. And then they really took over. I mean, they expanded and went crazy on the landscape all throughout for several million years. But look at the difference though. So at 370 million years was the first amphibian. Look how long it took before we got the first reptile. 50 million years. It took 50 million years for amphibians to become reptiles, for the first reptiles to come from the amphibian lineage. 50 million years separates these guys. Why are we lumping them together? Why do I have to say I'm a herpetologist and not get credit for studying two completely different organisms, sets of organisms? Okay, so 50 million years separates them. Great, good to know. And then let's put it in the scheme of things. And basically here's amphibia on the bottom left. Reptiles came up at some point. Reptiles then led to mammals at some point. Birds came up and out of that group at some point, and then up in the upper left, you are here. So that's there's your history of all of your lineage in a nutshell. Amphibians and reptiles are clearly different. So, but let's get to the practical world now. So you can see they were separated by 50 million years of evolution development. What makes one and the other one the other one? Here's a classic amphibian. So here's an amphibious creature, the one that we know and love, frogs. Frogs are a great representative of the group. You can see the frog sitting up on either on a stump or whatever that is, their log, and another one sitting on land, another one sitting in Christy's fingers. Is this your picture, Christy?
Yes.
How did you get this? I'm so jealous. I'm gonna put my name at the bottom of this one. How'd you get this, by the way?
They're always so hard to find, and I heard it calling and calling, and I could tell it was low, and I found it on a branch. A tree had fallen down across a pond, and I found it sitting on the branch, and it blended in so well. It was so well camouflaged, but eventually I did see it, and so I was really excited because so many times I can hear them. I know they're right there, but I can't find them.
Yeah, good. You're right. Because if you listen closely, they're actually going crazy outside my house right now. It's kind of this fall calling is going on. I don't know what they're doing, but I'll point it out if if I hear some. Okay, but interestingly, so this guy was near the water's edge or over the water or something?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
At the end.
And the other guys are on land. So there's an amphibian, right? But amphibios means two lives. And what we know is that they develop in the water, right? I mean, that's kind of the story on these guys. They develop in the water and then they turn into something else. They metamorphose and go on land. So there's our amphibious life in a nutshell. And if we think about amphibians, this is the type of habitat we would think about. If you walk into here, you would probably first think, oh yeah, this is a good place for frogs or for salamanders, but frogs. And then if you come at a certain time of year, you will definitely hear the frogs. They'll be making themselves real noticeable, real obvious. Okay, so that's what we think: aquatic environments, frogs, but then we know that they are amphibians, and then they know they go on land at some point, as opposed to reptiles. So these are like these general characteristics that we kind of, I think, I'm not forcing you into believing this, but I'm just summarizing what most people think when they think of an amphibian versus a reptile. These are reptiles. Reptiles are represented here by snakes, lizards, the lizard in the left bottom and the left top, and turtles. And those are the major groups of these guys. We think of them as terrestrial. These guys are on land. So you'd say, oh, this is what separates them. One of them's aquatic and one's terrestrial, right? Wrong. That is totally wrong. Because, as we just said, there's some frogs on land. Look at the upper right. Uh, you know this guy? This is one we see all the time everywhere. Christy, pop quiz?
The one on the right,
Upper right, yep.
toad.
American toad. There's an American toad. We see them all over the place, in your gardens, in your yards, in the woods, up in fields, in residential neighborhoods. These guys, you don't really see them too often in the water. They're really, you think of them as terrestrial. They have dry, hardened skin, and they do really well on land. Go down to the left, or over to the left, and those are painted turtles. And painted turtles, where do we see them? In the water, almost exclusively. You'll see them basking on logs, basking on land at the water's edge, but these guys live their life in the water. So if we did the water versus land thing, you'd say the toad on the right is a reptile, and that the turtle on the left is a amphibian. But that's not true. That's, in fact, both of those are the opposite. And then just to confuse things a little more, look down on the picture on the bottom. And this is a picture of, well, first of all, eggs. And I think, what kind of eggs were these, Christy? Do you remember?
They're wood frog eggs.
Oh, yeah, okay. And this newt was in there eating the wood frog eggs, just pounding them down. This guy comes from on land, and he comes in and takes full advantage of the water because he's able to live in both environments. And that makes the story very interesting. So in the upper right, you have a amphibian that's terrestrial, mostly. On the left, you have a reptile that's aquatic, mostly. And at the bottom, you have this kind of amphibious assault unit that lives in both places. So let's talk about them for a while. This is the eastern newt. And the eastern newt is a really interesting character in our story here. The eastern newts are really abundant, especially around here, but in fact, the entire range, probably of everybody who's participating here, you probably have places where you'd go and see lots and lots of newts. And you'll see them in two different places. First of all, let's start with, I guess we'll start early on in life at the aquatic larva. And the aquatic larva is starts as an egg and turns into this tiny little salamander with a swimming tail and bushy little gills, and stays in the water for several months. It then starts changing color, starts changing the texture of its skin, loses its gills, develops a good set of breathing lungs, and loses that obviously aquatic swimming tail and turns into this guy here. And this is a terrestrial eft, is what we call it. I'm not quite sure what an eft is. Christy, did we ever get to the bottom of that? What is technically an eft? Or is it a loose term?
I think I don't know. I don't know if it's loose or not, but I don't know that I technically know what it is. I just always equate the word eft with the terrestrial stage.
Yeah, yeah. And so here's the problem. It gets confusing. Like you could say, oh, the terrestrial stage. So here's the terrestrial F. The standard story is they start out in the water, they metamorphose, they turn into this terrestrial form, and they're just little guys. They're cute little guys, and they are very bright, tend to be very bright, and they live on land. And around here, they live on land from 2 to 7 years as immature newts. So these newts are immature for 2 to 7 years. And during that time, they're completely terrestrial. I mean, completely terrestrial. They never go in the water. Okay. And then maturity happens and they become adults. And as adults, they remetamorphose, turn back into these aquatic forms. And look, the color changes, the skin texture changes. They get this swimming tail once again. And these guys are completely able to live in water. Now, they still breathe air. They have lungs, so they come to the surface and breathe. And you'll see these guys a lot if you come into water in ponds in March, April, May, June, actually through the July, August, September, and October, and actually year round if you go to a place with a lot of newts. So that's led us to believe at some point that, well, let me start first. I'd say that some of the confusion about the word eft and all that stems from the literature over about 100-year period. I looked up some of these really old accounts of these animals, and for about 100 years, there was a long argument about whether this guy here, this terrestrial eft, was a different species than this aquatic adult. And it took about 100 years to realize, oh my gosh, these guys are actually the same species. It's just that you have to follow them for so many years and very hard. Okay, so we have these aquatic adults. So here's the story that it says in almost all the field guides. They start off as eggs. They turn into these little aquatic larvae that look like a lot like their adults, except for a few other features. They metamorphose, go on land for 2 to 7 years around here. And then they remetamorphose and become adults and go into the water, where they spend the rest of their life as aquatic adults. And that's probably what it says in almost all these field guides you're going to read. What Christy and I have been studying them over a bunch of years and basically said that that's not really true. What happens is they go through the first 2 stages for sure, 2 to 7 years on land as these bright colored individuals usually. They metamorphose and go into the water. They become adults where they breed. They then either stay or they go back, remetamorphose and go back on land, lose that swimming tail, lose the color, sometimes turn bright orange and often turn like a dull rusty brown. Like, Christy, what color is your shirt? That's a nude color, right?
Yeah, maybe
Kind of, yeah. I mean, some of them are
more
really,
orange than
yeah, right. And yeah, so they have really bright coloration. Interestingly, I want to say about that, the bright coloration is there to warn other predators, almost all predators, that they're toxic. And so they're basically advertising this toxicity, saying, don't touch me, you're gonna be sorry. If you take a bite out of me, you're gonna be really sorry. So that's a warning coloration, and that's what the bright orange is all about. The other thing that they're pretty unique, not only that they make themselves visible, but they also come out during the day. And so these guys you'll see in the morning and on wet days, and they'll be all walking about on the surface of the forest and just basically saying, don't bother looking in my direction. I'm not the salamander you want to be messing with. So, okay, so let's move forward. Probably one of my favorite stories, life stories, because they're not the standard metamorphose and turn into something else and then go back in for short stints. They can metamorphose, turn into an aquatic, then remetamorphose, turn back into aquatic, then remetamorphose, turn back into a terrestrial, then and they can do that for several years. These guys maybe for 15 to 20 years. So I just kind of bury myself in that guy, one, because he's cool, but also because it just shows the super crazy complexity of living in the water versus not living in the water. And that does not separate out these amphibians from reptiles, clearly. And here's a great example. But I will tell you what does separate them out. And the hint, and I'll give you a hint. And the hint is this newt, once it reaches maturity, is on its way into the water. And this turtle, once it reaches maturity, is on its way out of the water. And they're there for a very specific, they're doing that for a very specific reason. And that's what separates them out. So here's your big hint. This is the whole deal that took 50 million years of evolution and change to separate an amphibian from a reptile. And it's all in the egg. The whole story is embedded in this egg. Here's an amphibian egg. You can see that it's a larva, a developing embryo that's getting really close to larval stage. You can even see gills sticking out of this guy, just getting ready, probably another, I don't know, I'd say late stage. How long before hatching in this, Christy? What do you think?
I'm not, you mean how long till these individuals that we're viewing will hatch?
Yeah,
Yeah, they look like they're almost ready, like it could be within a week.
they kind of do, right? Look at the eyes are forming there, and then you get the tail and everything. And
The
I don't know
gills.
about legs and all. Legs don't seem fully developed yet, but and nevertheless, that's it. There it is. But look at this embryo. This embryo is just sitting in here. All it's had one membrane holding it, and the rest is just like a jelly substance around it. And here's the amphibian egg. The amphibian egg has one membrane, and then inside of that is the yolk and the embryo. And then the rest is just a bunch of jelly on the outside. This is really, really important because it really um, is very less complex than the embryos that came after it in vertebrate evolution. And it's very, very similar to a fish. In fact, looking at fish embryos and fish eggs and looking at amphibian eggs, you'd be hard pressed to distinguish them. So I think fairly, we should not be lumped in with amphibians and reptiles should not be lumped in. If I were to lump anything, I would lump fish and amphibians together based on the egg, especially based on that egg. Okay, so they then, because they have this egg, I know I'm going off, getting very detailed here, but the reality is that constrains them in all fashions. It means that that type of egg is not resistant to drying out. It can't handle being dried out. So amphibians have to have moist environment for their development. And that often is the water, although there's all sorts of exceptions around the world, as you might imagine, but it's always a wet environment, at least. And around here, it's the water. Okay, for the most part. We'll pick that story up later too. All right, separate this out. So having said that they need a moist environment, here's either a reptile or an amphibian laying its eggs on the beach, on a sandy, dry, sandy beach. So that really couldn't happen in amphibian, with the makeup of amphibians and amphibian reproduction. It couldn't happen. It took 50 million years for these guys, for amphibians to develop into, or some form of amphibian develop into some form of a reptile, because it has this very different egg and embryo that can survive being on land. And so that's the difference. There's a turtle egg, in the case, little snapping turtles hatching out of an egg, coming out of land. Looks like a sandy kind of substrate there. Sea turtles in the lower right, coming out of a nest after being high and dry in the sandy beach in the tropics for probably about 70 days. And they come out and then go into the water. And the reason they're able to do this and lay their eggs on land is because of this. This very specialized egg that's now way more than one membrane. It's got a few membranes. One of them has the entire embryo in it. And the other one, very importantly, these are the, takes waste. And so there's got to be a way for the waste to go somewhere. And then they also need to exchange with the environment. The way that the amphibians do it is they basically diffuse stuff out into the wet environment. And the way that reptiles do it is that they contain their own waste in its own separate compartment, and they get their nutrients from the yolk and from the fluid surrounding them. This allows them to go up on land. And that's really it in a nutshell. So if you want to know the difference between an amphibian and a reptile, it's that one has an egg that needs to stay wet, and another that has basically can go on land, and in fact always nests on land. So all reptiles always nest on land. It gets a little more complicated with amphibians, but they always have a moist environment. So if somebody's heading in to reproduce into the water, it's an amphibian. If somebody's heading out of the water to reproduce on land, it's a reptile. Okay, so let's talk about development in water. Because of that, then we look at a habitat like this and you'd say, what would you say, Christy, amphibian or reptile habitat?
Say both.
Oh, see, you know too much. You just know too much. That's right, both exactly. But let's start from the beginning with eggs. And here's often because of the amphibian development, the way they do it, and because they're much more primitive, they have a complex life cycle. They start off as eggs up in the upper left, and these are real common around here. In fact, all these pictures are from animals around here. This is a spring peeper. The whole thing starts off as eggs, turns into this little tadpole looking guy. At some point develops over the summer months usually into a sprouts some legs, starts changing some of its surfaces, starts losing its tail, pulls all that stuff in, its legs get fully developed, and it also develops a set of lungs instead of the gills that it started off with. Even in this case, they're very tiny, they're still there. And turns into this guy. So here's a metamorphosed, newly metamorphosed spring peeper. And he's ready to go. Look, he's ready for living outside of the water, doesn't have an aquatic form at all, and has little suckers for feet so he can climb on things. And then they move to terrestrial habitats. And these spring peepers then, really, their habitat is the woods. They, in upland environments, they live in the upland. They're terrestrial for the rest of their life. So that's a complex life cycle. It starts off as something, turns into something else, a larval form, completes its metamorphosis to something else entirely, and then even changes habitats because of it. Let's talk about some of the common actors in our play around here, common regional amphibians and reptiles. I'll start with amphibians. And here's, I guess, some of the better known ones. I'll show you some of the better known ones, but they're also pretty common. So here, this guy is huge. This is the bullfrog. They are distinguished by a couple things. One is their ultimate size, which is really large. So you'll see a bullfrog and they can be this big. I mean, really, really big. Not the biggest frog around ever, but the biggest frog around here for sure. The problem with that as a distinction is it's not a good field mark because they start off small and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. So you can't say, oh, it's huge when it's small. So I'm going to tell you how to distinguish this guy. First of all, there's two guys that have this very large, look at the ear where you would consider the ear, right in here. And this is an external device. It's the tympanum, like timpani, you know, the big drums. And all this is a way it means to pick up low vibration sound. And low vibration sound is common in a lot of frogs, but these guys are lower than most, and this tympanum then vibrates with when they hear something really low frequency. Okay, there are two guys around here, two species around here that have that very large tympanum. So that makes it real easy. You look and you say, oh, it's got that big tympanum thing, and it's either a bullfrog or a green frog. And I'm gonna then show you the green frog. There's a green frog. Look at that tympanum, same thing. Very large, huge, big compared to the body, right? Look at the differences. You see any differences? I mean, color is not a good thing to go by because color is highly variable, but there are some structural differences in these guys that you can look at, and I'm going to bring it back to this guy. Notice anything? I want you to look at, as you go behind the eyes and you see that little crest, look right down basically the top of the animal's body. And do you notice anything? And do you notice anything here? So here's the crest, goes down and around. And in this case, look at the crest. It goes down and actually covers 2/3 of the animal's body. So the really good field mark, they're both big. They're both very big animals. And then bullfrogs get bigger than green frogs, but green frogs can get really sizable too. And they both have that large tympanum. But the bullfrog never has the ridges along the back. These are the dorsolateral folds. Is that right, Christy?
Yeah, dorsolateral ridge, I think.
Ridge, yeah, okay. Dorsolateral ridge is not present in the bullfrog, and it is present in this guy. In fact, a lot of the other frogs that you might confuse with these guys. So there's the green frog. Green frog has a dorsolateral ridge. It extends 2/3 of its body. They both have a big tympanum, bullfrog and green frog. They both have similar life characteristics too that I want to talk about, I think, right now. But before we do, one is the green frog. I don't see this in bullfrogs too much, but I do see it a lot in green frogs. They change color with temperature, like a lot of these amphibians do. And you can see here, and so this guy's probably sitting in cold water because he's brown. And they get actually almost black. The colder they get, the darker they get. And then if they get warm, they start turning green. And you can see his underside here is green. And that's the color you might see these guys. So a green frog will truly be green if it's warmed up and all the way to brown. They do this color kind of shifting a lot more easily and readily and more extremely than a bullfrog. Okay, so it's a green frog. Why? It's got the big tympanum, but it's also got a ridge. And if it's got a ridge, it's not a bullfrog. This guy here is not really big, but so you would have a hard time distinguishing them based on size, other than those two characteristics. The other thing about bullfrogs and green frogs is they both need water. They need water for the entire first summer of their development. They also need to overwinter in the same pond. And then the next year they start sprouting legs. Here we go. Here's the guy in the second year. And sometimes early in or late in the first year you start seeing this, but they need to overwinter. They sprout legs, they lose their tail, they lose their gills, they develop lungs, and they start becoming this guy. So this guy here is just, I remember it, was just finished metamorphosing and was getting ready to go on land, probably pretty close. And that means it's his second year of life. And just to prove it to you, I stumbled upon this pond that was just all ice, but melting around the edges so that they had open. And as I watched, a green frog swam up through the edge, around the edge, and up onto the top of the melting ice, and was swimming around in this melting ice. So these guys do fine overwintering in water, even in very cold water. In fact, they need it. So if you're going to have green frogs or bullfrogs, the water has to stay from one year to the next. It doesn't have to be permanent. It doesn't have to stay every year, but it certainly has to stay 2 years in a row occasionally, or probably more frequently than most. While we're in ponds and we're at other animals, first of all, look, these guys have this guy has ridges, so it's clearly not a bullfrog. This is another real common player in a lot of ponds, and I think, all right, I'll talk about these two, and then I want to talk about all four of them in their general life. They're not just dissimilar looking, they also have dissimilar life habits, and that distinguishes them too. Okay, so in this case, this is a leopard frog, very classic frog, the ribbit frog that we all know about and everything, and they're in all sorts of ponds in open water. I do want you to note that the leopard frog not only has ridges like a lot of these guys do, but look at its spots. This guy, just kind of look at the spots, see what you see, and then before we go, here's one that's just, I just love this picture. He's undergoing metamorphosis, and just in between those two evolutionary stages is kind of like evolution is happening right here. Look at that. This guy's got jumping legs getting ready, but he's still bogged down by that tail, and he's still like hanging out close to the water. Okay, so look at those guys' spots, look at the upper left, and then compare it to its close relative. So that was the leopard frog, and this is a pickerel frog. They both occur, you'll see them both around ponds, of course, but note the spots in the back. Look at the spots and look at the spots. First of all, this guy, I don't know, when it comes to spots, he doesn't have much self-respect. He's not very neat and orderly. They're kind of disheveled and all over the place. So they're not really lined up in neat rows. Look at this guy. Neat, single file, very tight, all in line like good little soldiers. So the line, that makes a big difference in these two. If you look at something and you only see it quickly and it looks like this, it's a pickerel frog. And if it doesn't look like that, it's a leopard frog. What I want to say is that these guys here, bullfrog and green frog, so here's how it goes. The bullfrogs tend to be near ponds. They like to be around the apron of the pond, and they can be sometimes, within the first several tens of meters away from the pond's edge. But that's where they make their living. They like making their living near ponds, and they do that for their entire life, even though they've become terrestrial. They easily jump into water and are also good swimmers later on. Same is true with leopard frogs. So bullfrogs, and leopard frogs make their livings around the edges of water. And they, even as adults, even when they're not breeding, you can see them pretty close. They're kind of like on this tight elastic band to the water. Think of it that way. So their whole life is spent near the water, and the farther away they get, the less often you'll see them. This is a one more thing about this leopard frog. If you look at its spots, it's got yellow halos, they call them, around each of the spots, as opposed to a pickerel frog. Pickerel frog doesn't have those yellow halos around the spots. Yellow halos, disorderly, and orderly, and no halos, pickerel frog. Leopard frogs like to live around the water like bullfrogs do. Green frogs are distinguished in their life patterns by being farther away from the water. In fact, they'll march across the countryside. They'll go into woods. They'll go pretty far away from their original pond. They go up creeks. Christy and I often find them under rocks, really far away from, probably from the nearest pond, which is probably the pond where they started their life. And these guys will be far afield. Same is true for pickerel frogs. So a bullfrog stays near, a green frog goes far. Leopard frog stays near. A pickerel frog will make very extensive upland movements. And so these are the guys you'll see upland, running around in open areas. They actually exist, we see them in openings in the woods, in fields, and definitely way far away from ponds in the stream. One more thing that you'll see in almost all of them in a pickerel frog is a pickerel frog not only is up in its terrestrial, but every once in a while you'll see this flash of yellow down here. So they have a yellow swash, a yellow region underneath their rear legs. If you see that, it's a pickerel frog. Okay, these guys, you don't see them too often. You definitely don't see them too often, but you definitely hear them. So have you ever gone by any stream, any pond, or any wet area, wetland, in the early spring and heard these guys? Christy, I'm not good at this. Could you how do these guys sound? I'm no good at doing peepers.
They just have a loud peep, just peep, 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 but very, very loud.
A little bit higher though, right? A little bit higher
Very,
pitched than.
yes, yes, very.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not good
but
at frog
Christy,
calls or bird calls.
what? They're like,
I'm
yeah.
not good at frog calls or bird
Oh,
calls.
that was pretty good though. Peep, peep, peep. That's why they're called spring peep. But she's violating the first order of spring peepers. The only ones that call. Females never call, Christy. You know better than that. You should have just been like silent, right? But so what you'll hear is these guys going peep, 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 peep. And if you do that and you multiply it by 10, it's pretty loud. Actually, 1 is pretty loud. And multiply it by 10 and it's pretty loud. And by 100 and it's really loud. And by 1,000 or more. What do you think the most peepers we've ever heard in a pond or marsh?
Wow.
Put a number on it. And given that they're all males too. I mean, it's only the males.
Yeah, let's see. Think of one particular very large wetland, and it sounded like hundreds, like 200, 300.
I know what you think. I'm way beyond that. I'm thinking thousands, like thousands. In some of these places you go in there, but it's hard because they're making so much noise. It's like maddening. It will drive you crazy, and you sit in there, and I love it. I'm sitting there going, "This is great. This is great. This is great." And about 10 minutes later, I'm like, "I can't stand it. You're driving me crazy." I mean, it's just a din. It's unbelievable. Okay, so those are peepers, and they're all coming back in. They're all adults, even though there's these cute little guys. They're all adults, and they're coming back in to breed because they need an aquatic beginning of their life. And great field mark on these guys. These guys are called crucifer is their species name. Crucifer means cross, and that's because they have this X on the back. It's a cross on the back, and almost everyone I've ever seen has that. So if you see it, it's a little guy, and probably, I don't know, like an inch, Christy, or more, maybe two max. You think? What do you think?
Yeah.
That'd be big. A 2 would be a big boy.
2, but definitely, an inch. And
yeah. So an inch and a half, and if you see them like that, those are adults. It seems impossible, but they are, and they have a cross on their back. They're good climbers, and they're good jumpers. They also have a very big voice, and it's not coming directly out of their body. They inflate a sac and and you watch it inflate, it gets really huge, and that um, resonates and sends their voice out really loud. So those are the males doing that calling. And they're also get to be a few years old. So it takes one season to go on land, probably another season before they become mature, and they probably last, I don't know, I'd be making it up, but I'd say a few more years after that. So the guys you're looking at are tiny but powerful, and maybe 3 to 5 years old. Here's another guy that's, if you looked at those feet, there's nice suction cup feet on those peepers earlier. Here's a guy with true, really good suction cups. These are tree frogs, and peepers are of the same, are related to them. This is the gray tree frog. This is the one that you saw, right, Christy?
Yes, yep, that's the one that was on
Man,
top of the tree that fell across the pond.
wow. Okay, check this guy out. If you were looking for color as a means to distinguish, you were looking for the wrong thing. This is the wrong guy to do it. I told you earlier that the green frogs and a lot of the other frogs will actually get darker, and so they're highly variable within an individual. These guys are highly variable within an individual, and look what it does. These guys will go from green, very bright green, all the way to this color and darker even, and if you, this gives you a hint why. Look at the stick that it's on. The stick's got lichens on it. The stick's kind of brown and gray and mottled gray. And this guy, if you give him enough time, he'll change his color to match that background. They're not instantaneous, but they're pretty quick about it. Did this guy change color while you're looking, or was he like this when you got him?
No, he was like that the whole time. The thing that I found interesting is that, you know, when you look at toads, they look dry, and you touch them and they feel dry.
Mm-hmm.
When I looked at the tree frog, he looks dry, and yet when I touched him, he felt very smooth and moist. And it was this disconnect, you know, in my brain between what I expected to feel and what I was actually feeling. So that's kind of cool.
Because they look like this wrinkly old dry skin, basically, right?
Yeah.
It's a very cool animal. I mean, it's really cool, and I can't do that. It's more like a, I don't know. It seems to me like a maniacal kind of, almost a cackle. Um, is that what? I don't know how to describe that sound they make.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of maniacal. I'm not going to even try it. So
Yeah, I know. It's like, I don't know. I can't even do it. I cannot do that. I was hoping that yeah, right. I was hoping that I'd hear one outside and then maybe like turn on the light, put my microphone out there. Okay. So anyway, they change color. They're tree frogs. They start off their life in the water, just like the other guys we just saw. They metamorphose after the summer. They come on land and really occur in all sorts of upland habitats. Not real big players in the woods, though. Is that right, Christy? Don't you think?
Yeah, more, well, woods and trees and near open habitat, I would say.
Yeah, right. It's almost like an edge. They're edge kind of,
Yeah.
right, inhabitants. And that, but you'll see them in yards and all that. I see them up in my house. I looked down and I heard one that was in the, the vent pipe coming up from the, like probably from the bathroom or, one of those vents. And I was up on the roof and I kept hearing this guy and he was super loud and I kept wondering, where is he coming from? And I looked down in and he's sitting in the top of this pipe and I don't know if he was using the pipe, but it just worked out as this megaphone. I mean, it was like cranking out over the whole neighborhood. And he's just sitting in there happily screaming his way. All right, so that's a gray tree frog, and they're really cool. Great climbers. You'll see them 30 feet in the air if you can, or you hear them up there. Very hard to see because they're very well camouflaged. All right, so those are the tree frogs. And you can see there's this aquatic component to the lives, but the guys have been showing here are pretty terrestrial for their adult lives, bringing us to the American toad, which is probably the most terrestrial of all these frogs. And he starts life in water, but I put air quotes around that water because they don't have much self-respect. They'll basically go reproduce in any kind of water, anything. I'll show you some examples in a sec. They are very, as Christy said, they look like very dry skin. They tend to like moisture though. All these guys tend to like it a little bit more moist than dry, but these guys can withstand lots of dryness without suffering desiccation. And that's because their skin has a thicker texture. It doesn't transpire as much fluid. They're able to keep body moisture. That's why you see them up on land. You see them far away from any body of water. Sometimes there's no body of water anywhere near that they could possibly have come from at any stage in their life. And that's because these guys will breed in anything. They have no self-respect when it comes to breeding. They'll go in a puddle, they'll go in the ditch very commonly. This guy here, I'm seeing I think it's me taking a picture of my shadow and then somebody else, and we're sitting there looking over just this little rut caused by a truck. And so these guys will reproduce in these. So toads are different looking. And the nice thing about it is for most people listening to this, if you see a toad and if it looks like that, you can be really cool and say, if someone says, oh, what kind is that? You can say, oh, I believe that's an American toad, because that's the only one we have around here. But be careful, anybody who's down on the coastal plain, you start picking up another. So Long Island and New York City, New York area, Lower Hudson, maybe even, you pick up Fowler's toad. So you'll have two different types. But anybody else, you can just be really, really smart and say, oh, it looks like an American toad to me. Okay, the American toad lays its eggs in its strings. Look at these, I don't know if you can see them here, but it looks like intestines all wrapped around. These are all single file eggs, all in a string, and that's how they lay their eggs. So if you see them, it's very unique for the guys around here, and that's an American toad. And also unique is when they break out of the eggs and turn into these tiny little black, very dark, no colors distinguishable on these guys. Larvae. The larvae tend to all swim together in these, if you disturb them, they'll all move together. So basically in tight schools. I see this as totally different behavior. So there's a toad. Its characteristic is it looks like a toad. It's got eggs that are characteristically single file, and it's got larvae that are small, black, and tend to move in tight schools. And so then I want to go to salamanders. And salamanders are a whole different group of amphibians. Everything we've looked at so far has been an amphibian. And these guys are modern representatives of amphibians too. This is a spotted salamander. Spotted salamanders are really very terrestrial, extremely terrestrial. In fact, they come from a group of salamanders that we term the mole salamanders, and they're mole salamanders because they dig really well. They go into existing burrows, crevices, and I think they maybe even push and shovel some dirt a little bit, but they can really go deep underground. In fact, that's where they live their life. They live in the woods. They live deep under, often underground, often under deep, big, dark, wet logs, sometimes in the middle of these rotted logs, and sometimes deep under rocks. You rarely encounter them, and they don't make any noise either. And it's just something you just don't see too often. But the reality is there are lots of them. So we go out every year, we bring our class out and go to these places where these guys all come bubbling up out of the ground. They come walking into the pond, from out of the woods and into the pond. And this is one of our students. This is not a trick. This is like a full-grown adult student with a salamander. That's how big they are. These guys are huge. And you think, what is this thing? It's crazy. It's got this bright spots. It's huge. It's something that's, like almost nightmarish in its size. And you can't believe that this is actually crawling around in your neighborhood. And they are. If there's a pond, they probably are. If there's a pond with woods, then they almost definitely are. If it's a pond with woods that have not been too disturbed for a long time, then I guarantee you have these guys. You just won't see them until you go in as snow melts in the early spring, like late winter, you'll start seeing this and another species that are just this big, and they all come out from hiding and go into ponds so they can mate. This is a spotted salamander. There's a Jefferson salamander that looks kind of like it, a little bit duller and no spots, and they're just as huge as that. These guys are huge. They're really charismatic, and that crazy bright yellow spotting. And this is probably about the dingiest one I've ever encountered. And most of them are like that. It is just impressive. Okay, they come into water. The males put little sperm packets down. They walk in front of the female and put these little packets, these pyramids of sperm, and put them in front of the female. And the female walks over them, and theoretically, that's what they're trying to get. She picks them up into her cloaca, and they fertilize, and they make a plug, and then fertilize her eggs. And that's what they're all doing there. They're all doing this. While they're doing that, if you go out at night, you can see them all, for one thing, coming into the pond across land, especially on a rainy night. And then if you're lucky enough, you can see them in the water, and they're all swimming around each other and bubbling in the water. If you ever go out at night in March, it's really cold and rainy, then and the water's bubbling, it's these guys going into this crazy mating dance. Spotted salamanders and Jefferson salamanders. And then, of course, the newt, which is really perplexing for a lot of reasons. I've already shared a lot of his story. It's really got all these crazy variations in its life. You're aquatic, you're terrestrial, you're aquatic, you're terrestrial. Make up your mind. What are you? I don't know. It's so conflicted all the time. But the other thing that really gets people is that when they're terrestrial, they're very dry and they're very lizard-like. So lots of people will say, I think I have a lizard here. And if I asked you, okay, pop quiz, this dry lizard-looking guy who lives on land and spends almost all his adult life on land, or a big chunk of it, what is it? Christy, pop quiz, what is it? Amphibian or reptile?
It's an amphibian.
Good answer. It's a good, and it's an amphibian not because it's not dry and hardy to the environment and walking around like a lizard and looks like a lizard. It's an amphibian because if it's actually got this very archaic egg that needs to be in the water to develop. Okay, so there's your newt. Oh, by the way, and I want to say, the newt is just a name for this animal, but the newt actually is a salamander. So we had salamanders, there's one, there's another, that's a salamander. Salamander is just a bigger, broader category for these guys. And there are plenty of salamanders around. So you're walking into the woods, and especially if you get down by a stream, you'll find these guys. And these guys are super plentiful. This is the Allegheny Mountain dusky salamander. We have two types of dusky salamanders around here. They both look very similar. You can see the color variation. So forget it. If you see something orange and say, oh, I saw a salamander that was orange, you wouldn't necessarily say it's an Allegheny Mountain dusky. That often look like this. This guy's a little bit cooler, he's a little bit darker, and the color variation is just stark with these guys. But they do have characteristics that distinguish them. And I like my favorite one. I don't think I have a picture. I know I don't have a picture of it here, but I can kind of make it out, is if you look from the angle of the jaw, which is about here, there, to the eye, how's that go? Like there's a light line. So it's very hard, but if you kind of look and go, oh, there's this lightened line, everything else is brown, but there's this light tan kind of line. Or in the case of this guy, everything else is reddish, but there's this light tan kind of line. Then that line is a great field mark for a dusky salamander. Dusky salamanders have it. If they're really cold, it's hard to see because they're dark, but you can usually see it. If they're really warm, it's because they're bright. It's sometimes hard to see, but you can still see it. So anyway, line from the angle of the jaw to the eye. These guys live, their first part of their life needs a little bit of water or moisture because they have these really small gills. So they're usually in wet areas and stream-side salamanders, although we do find them up in the woods too. Okay, remember when I said that amphibians develop in water? Well, I think I lied. I lied with that one. But, it's like everything else. Like, you really want the real facts, then they get more complicated. So, let's return to this one later. But I just want to say that there are guys that don't develop in the water, and they are also amphibians, and they are also salamanders. And there's a big family of these guys out there. Some of the most abundant guys you'll see. If you pick up a rock, you'll find this guy, the redback salamander. Pick up a log, roll a log, you'll see 2 or 3 sometimes. And the redback salamanders is something you'd see in every woods in our region. And you see them as highly abundant and very numerous. So it's red, it's upland, it's under cover by day and comes out and is a voracious predator at night, and it's really common, and that's the redback salamander. I don't know if I have any great field marks. Christy, is there one you could pick up, and what do we usually do? Just go, hey, it's a...
No, I mean, I think almost its body form.
I know, but that you have to see a lot of them, right?
Yeah. I mean, typically it would be the red coloration, but then they do other colors, other color phases. So it's not always a good
I
distinction.
know, and then you and I we'll look at them and go, oh, it's a redback because you can see it's slim and it's got the same, we can kind of look at body proportions and all that. But one of the things that really distinguish, well, a couple things, but one is it doesn't have that stripe. So let's say what it doesn't have. Its legs are of equal girth, and if you look at those dusky salamanders, they have these pretty solid back legs and these little skinny little front legs. So they're uh, those, basically if it doesn't have those characteristics, and especially if it's reddish and has kind of solid stripiness along the side, redback salamander, very common. You'd be a safe bet to say if you're in the woods and you pick something up and there's a salamander under it, it's probably a redback. Okay. Slimy salamanders are highly related, same genus, and they're a lot bigger. They occur in upland habitat, also in the woods. Often we'll find them in dry, like hill slopes, much drier than the redback salamander. But they also are excellent hiders. So the second I watched them at night, where I pick up something and they see this little head sticking out and they whoop and they jump away. Whereas the redback salamander just sit there and go like, "What are you looking at?" And dazed and confused or something. But these guys here will always run. So I think there's a ton of these slimy salamanders out there, but you just never see them, and you probably won't see too many of them. And they probably should be called the sticky salamander because glutinous is really their species name, and that's what they are. They're very sticky. They have this sticky surface. It probably allows them to go into drier habitats. Okay, so those are salamanders. We covered a bunch of amphibians. Let's move into drier habitats, which we characterize as reptiles. Reptiles took 50 million years to be able to conquer some of these types of habitats. And some of the common ones we find around here are, I'll work through just a few of them, but a lot of people know the water snakes. And the water snake we have around here is a northern water snake. These are really common. They're also commonly, I think, perceived as dangerous uh, and venomous because they integrate with, in the south, with cottonmouths, moccasins, and they look kind of similar. And they have those. Look at the kind of diamond patterns. They almost have uh, a menacing rattlesnake pattern to them. They are not venomous. None of the snakes we have here are venomous. So that's pretty good. As you move a little farther south, you got to start worrying about it. If you move into down in the Hudson region, I start thinking about there's a species down there for sure. But everybody else who's up here, we're kind of lucky. I wouldn't be picking up any snakes though, but I certainly wouldn't be picking up this water snake, not because it's venomous, but because it is the most aggressive guy you can imagine, and it'll bite you the second you touch it. But it won't just bite you and hang on. It'll bite you, let go, bite you again, let go, bite you again, and it'll just keep doing it as long as you let him. They will just keep biting you. They're super aggressive. When you pick them up out of the water, they're highly aggressive. When you pick them up on land, they're highly aggressive. They just will always guarantee to bite you. Okay, so that's a water snake. They do live in the water. They do really well in the water. Lots of snakes, when they fall in the water, they swim on the surface. These guys will sit on the bottom, sit in a creek. They fish underwater. They spend a lot of time doing making a good living in the water. Moving up onto land, here's probably one of the more calm snakes, like to show diversity in behavior, and it's a milk snake. Milk snakes will have varied coloration. They will go all the way from red to gray and even brownish. And in this area, they're about the only thing we have. They start looking very similar to a corn snake if you start moving down south. But I'd say the other thing about milk snakes is they can look really, really threatening. They have that coloration that screams, "Don't touch me! I'm gonna inject venom in you." In fact, they are probably lookalikes for that reason. But they're extremely docile. And I'd say there's two ways to look, two field marks in a milk snake. One of them is, I don't think you can see here on this picture, but right up here on the back of the head, where the neck would meet the head, we kind of envision that, is this kind of a Y pattern. It's this very elongated Y. If you think of a Y chromosome, if you've ever seen a Y chromosome, that's kind of what they look like. And it's almost always there. In fact, everyone I've seen has had some sort of that. And that's a great pattern to see over the top without having to touch them. And if you are touching them and they have and you see their underside is a checkerboard pattern. So their entire underside has one black check, one dark check, one light, one dark, one light, one dark, one light, and it's pretty phenomenal. They're the only snakes with that. A lot of clearings and areas that are on the edge, on fields and woods. You'll see some of these guys, and one of them is a ringneck snake, and called that because it's got a ring that goes completely around its neck area. Very obvious and very straightforward. It's a ringneck. It's got a ring, and it's a ringneck snake. There's a couple other players there, and those are Decay's brown snake and red-bellied snakes. Red-bellied snakes also have a red belly. These guys will all occur in openings and clearings near the edge of woods, and also in those areas, but also used to be really common in residential area, what are now residential areas, and they've slowly been extirpated. And I think farms too is what I've heard in the past. Is the green snake. We have a green snake. Christy, pick your favorite.
My favorite of these or of all the snakes?
Is what?
Of these that are pictured?
Yeah, of these and of all. Yeah, of all.
Okay. Well, definitely I think I like the smooth green snake the best because its color is fabulous and they're very docile and they're not as commonly found as some of the others, I would say. But the milk snake actually is a close second for me. I think they're fascinating.
Yeah, they are. And what's really cool is they're both the most docile creatures on the planet. They're unbelievable. Green snakes are just easy to hold, and they just don't. They're not alarmed easily. And we when we find them with the class, there's people who don't like snakes, and we don't make them touch them. We don't. We would never force anybody to do anything. But at some point or another, we've had almost everybody who's never touched a snake, don't want to, no thanks, no thanks. And then we have these pictures of them holding a green snake and just like grinning from ear to ear. This is so great. Can I take it home? Some people say, this is so great. So green snakes are awesome. I think they're more common than you think they are, but they really blend in for that green color. All right, so there's snakes. We're always looking for, and then we have a lot of other species of snakes around, especially as you move out of the region a little bit. And then we have one species of skink here. This is a lizard. We have one species of lizard. It's a skink, the coal skink, the northern coal skink. It runs all the way up the Appalachians, and its northernmost, I think, population is in like Rochester, New York, somewhere around Letchworth area in the Genesee River Valley, and they really like being up in kind of mountainous and remote areas, but they really like openings. We don't see them too much in the woods, and the only time I've seen them in the woods is where there's a clearing like sizable enough for them to make a living there. So they tend to make their living in clearings. We've done some studies on them, and we've actually probably enhanced their environment a little bit by putting overwintering areas in clearings, and they seem to do well. They're beautiful. Skinks, as you move south, you start getting another species down in the New York region. And farther south, you get a few more species of skinks. They're these overstuffed kind of lizard. They just like full and and they look like ready to burst all the time. I think of them as sausages. Excuse me. They're also beautiful. They have a bright metallic blue on some of the species, on some of the individuals, and deep orange. They're pretty aggressive. They'll bite you, and they don't hurt. They're kind of funny, but this is something we're always looking for, and we find when we get very excited.
Yeah, they're very fast.
Oh my gosh, right? So we'll have people in our class, and we'll go, all right, now if you find a skink, you're gonna get special extra credit. You'll get real. So every once in a while they go, whoa, what was that? And Kristen and I will be like, 100 feet apart, somewhere else going, oh, it was a skink. It was a skink. If it ran that fast. Okay, and then just to show the representative of the other group of reptiles around here, it's turtles. Most common one by far is the painted turtle. These painted turtles there's the classic environment. They're aquatic. They live virtually their entire lives in the water. They're all set up to be in the water. but they're also, amphibious in terms of being able to be up on logs, up on land, up in the areas around. But they do, they're totally aquatic species. So you couldn't keep these guys on land and expect them to live. They're not set up for it. So the painted turtle, for obvious reasons, and there's the obvious reasons right there. First of all, they have stripes on their neck, but then they have this really, really elaborately painted underside of their shell. Also, if you looked over the top of this guy, he's got some pretty elaborate patterns on the top too. Lots of times as they get older, they get duller and browner or even black, but they almost always carry a beautiful pattern on the bottom of their upper shell. So there's a painted turtle. They're aquatic. They have to go on land to lay their eggs. So if you want to have a good population of these guys, you need to have something nearby that's an open to the sun place where they can dig and lay their eggs once a year. They'll come out, say June and July. I think you'd expect to see these guys for most of this region. But you need an open area too. So here's my classic perfect example of if you want to make a pond for these guys, water that's got some shell stuff areas, emergent vegetation, logs laying in the water so they can bask in all sorts of ways to get to it. And then over here, maybe somewhere over here, you would have like a nesting area. So, I mean, the best would be loose soil, but they can dig in pretty hard stuff and, but open to the sky. And I guess a face only a mother could love. Look at that guy. This is the snapping turtle. They are called the snapping turtle for obvious reasons. If you get them, now all turtles will bite, and I wouldn't let any of them bite you, but these guys here are super aggressive. That's how they really interact with most of the rest of the planet. For the most part, they live underwater. They come up to breathe only. You don't see them too often. You see this head sticking out of the water, and then they go back down and sit on the bottom. So to see this guy here who's actually nesting, that's exactly how they sit on the bottom of a usually deep, dark. These guys are denizens of the bottom, murky, dark waters. And if something swims by them, they reach out and snap it. They're really quick about it, and they'll eat anything that comes by them. They'll also eat anything alive or dead, doesn't matter. They don't really care. They're not picky eaters at all. They live in the water until, well, a couple times a year, you'll probably see these guys out and about. And one of them is during nesting season, and that's usually around the beginning of July, depends on where you are, north or south. And then let's say that during June and July, you'll start seeing these guys crawl up, and you'll usually see them on the road or as you're driving down the road. And they're looking to go, they come out of the water and they're looking for an open area to nest, often on the side of the road. So this guy here, look, is actually right off the gravel shoulder off the road. I was driving in to actually, I think I was doing the Master Naturalist thing with Christy at the Arnott. I went, what the heck? What did I just see? I back up. I'm doing 65 miles an hour, of course, because I'm always late. And I race back and go, oh, it's a snapping turtle, great. And I took some pictures, including getting close up. And right after this picture, he snapped the heck out of my camera. So these guys, this is a female. She's out nesting. They go and they dig with their front claws. They push some dirt aside, and then they dig a hole with their rear claws. Very sharp, stout talons that they use to dig even this hard, rocky soil. And then into that, they'll drop some eggs, 30 to 50 often, as many as that. And then they cover it back up. Often urinate on the soil. I'm not sure before or after. It's probably to soften it up, I would think. But they cover it up and then they leave and they go back to the water. So you'll see these guys, they're crossing the road. And so what you do if they're crossing the road is stop traffic so that nobody runs them over if you're brave enough to do that. And I don't like touching them because they're will turn around and snap you. But if they're going in a direction, then if you can allow them to keep going in that direction, that's the way to go. Don't try and return them from the way they came, because they'll just come back out again and keep going. They're very persistent. Some people use a shovel. You get in behind them and kind of pick them up and push them, slowly prod them to the direction they're going. But they'll try and snap you the whole time you're doing that. So I wouldn't touch these guys. Field marks on these guys, well, first of all, they're really, really different than every other creature you know around here. And second is they're getting to be the size of a sea turtle around here, a small sea turtle. They are this big or bigger. So if you see something a foot across walking on the road, or even I'd say 16 or 18 inches, I'm not counting the head, but they can be really big. I mean, huge around here. That's a snapping turtle. While we're in turtles, I told you that I'd work with sea turtles. So here's a couple examples around here. We actually have 4 species in the New York region. Green turtles and Kemp's Ridley turtles are very common. Loggerhead, 5, I'm sorry, 5, because we do have an occasional other species. So we go loggerhead turtles, green turtles, Kemp's Ridley turtles, leatherback turtles, and an occasional hawksbill will be up, in some weird, but I would say four species mainly. And these guys are ones you would see commonly in Long Island Sound, Peconic Bays, in these inshore waters, and up to Massachusetts and that area, Cape Cod Bay. And these guys will come in the summertime, and this is what you see. So here's a young juvenile Kemp's Ridley turtle. They come in every year and take advantage of the excellent foraging in eastern Long Island. Here's on the other side of things. This is these guys. I know the guy this is his father, so I got the slide from him. They harpooned this guy off of Montauk Point in late 50s. I think 57 is what I want to say. And that's not a trick photograph. These guys aren't midgets or anything like that. That's a leatherback turtle. So you go from the smallest turtle, although this is a juvenile, to the largest of all turtles, of all reptiles actually, the leatherback turtle. And they're swimming right off our shore here. And there's me swimming after a leatherback, and that he was winning that race. And then we have green turtles. So very common. Most people are shocked that they're up here, but they really take full advantage of, all 4 of these species take full advantage of the northern waters with plenty of food. Okay, so here's your pop quiz. So Christy, you are our participating audience. Amphibian or reptile habitat?
Both.
Both. She's good. She's on a roll, I can tell. Amphibian or reptile habitat?
That's a tough one. Both?
Yes. Cool. Yes. And in fact, we see tons of frogs in these places too, which is remarkable sometimes. Okay. No water, amphibian or reptile habitat?
That's both.
That is both. This is a bay that dries up every year in South Carolina where I worked. And the record, I don't know if it's a record anymore, but we probably blew it away since then, was 10,000 amphibian mole salamanders in one day leaving this pond, because we had a fence up around, and we got 10,000 in one day because the pond was drying up. They were all undergoing metamorphosis already because the pond was drying slowly. And then all of a sudden they just were like, all right, that's it, we're out of here. And they just started piling out. And that was just one day. It was a crazy day too. Okay, so, and then they go and they live the rest of their life on the upland habitat. Okay, no water to be seen, not anywhere ever. Amphibian or reptile habitat?
That would be both.
That would be both. And the reason why is I told you we'd get back to this. And just when we think we figured it out with they're aquatic or they're not, we have these guys. These guys are redback salamanders. Their eggs are terrestrial. Their larvae are terrestrial. Their juveniles are terrestrial. Adults are terrestrial. And you think this is some weird aberration or anomaly, but in fact, these guys live their entire lives on land. They're an amphibian that's developed technique to do that. And they've done a really good job because they're the most abundant vertebrate in our upland forests. What are the stats on this? They're always astounding. You always remember them. The most abundant.
Yeah, they're the most abundant. So there are more of them numerically, I think, in Harvard Forest. They did a study, and there were more redback salamanders numerically than all the songbirds, mice, and shrews in the forest. And in terms of biomass, so pound per pound, I think it was very similar in biomass to
those other groups. So they didn't count like the big things like deer and bears and stuff when they're doing biomass, but these guys are the most abundant. So actually, if you go in and pick up a rock in the forest around here, you're going to see one of these guys most likely. It's crazy. The density of these is crazy. Anyway, so they have an amphibian that's figured out how to live completely its entire life cycle on land. So when Christy and I have done a lot of stuff, we make landscape enhancements. We're always aware that aquatic habitats are really important, but the surrounding terrestrial habitat is really important. Here's some great ponds that we ended up, Christy was out there instructing the guy on how to make this guy. And we were basically building it and hoping that they would come and another one. We even built a little boardwalk so that people could see it. And within the first available time, we started getting green frogs. So green frogs showed up almost immediately after we dug this thing. So we dug it in summer. After the end of one winter and the early March, we start seeing them all over the place. So build it and they will come for sure. And these aquatic habitats are good for frogs, snakes, turtles, salamanders, you name it. Not to mention other types of organisms. But if you think about the landscape, a woodland landscape, you need a combination of things. So great for snakes, lizards, and frogs are edges and openings. And so this is a great thing to have in your landscape. And you might say, oh, let's return this to a forest. But the reality is these guys and a whole bunch of other similar animals really, really make a living out here in these openings and on edges. So basically overall, if you think about it, we showed you the forest, and the forest has got all those salamanders in it and all sorts of other guys, aquatic habitats, and even openings in the forest. And if you have the ability, or if you're telling people what to do, the reality is all these habitats are good, but if you have enough land and you have a choice to pair together, either you have enough land or your neighbors have different types of land, the more complexity you have in the habitat, the better, and the better place for amphibians and reptiles. So build it and they will come is our title of this one. Okay, well, thanks very much, guys. Go be careful of some snakes, but not all of them. Go feel free to interact with amphibians and reptiles. Make sure that you don't have a lot of junk and toxins on your hands if you're going to touch them. But don't be afraid to hold them. And if you do hold them close to the ground so if they run away, it's no big deal. They don't hurt themselves. And they're great tools to teach environment and ecology and conservation to people of all ages. Thanks very much. Thanks, Christy. You did great on the quizzes, by the way.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much for the presentation, Steve. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for your time.
It's my pleasure, as always. Thank you.